Hello, this is JT and Lady C, and we want to welcome everyone to our special live stream today. We wanted to take this opportunity to discuss something that we know has been circulating and everyone has keen interest in it, and that is the case involving two elders in Illinois. Today, we have a special guest with us. We have Mark O'Donnell, and what he will be helping all of us to see is exactly what took place inside that courtroom. Just to give you a little historical context, we know for last 20 years, the society has often come out very hard on many denominations that dealt with this issue of how they handle child issues within their churches. If you go back and you read the articles, many of these articles are just scathing. Well, the Watchtower, unfortunately, is now in the same hot seat. And what we will see, as we've seen so many times before, they will make literally every excuse to make it appear that we're not like everyone else. Well, we're going to turn this over to Mr. Mark O'Donnell. He's going to help us to get basically an overview of what has happened because this case is wrapped up. And so we're going to basically, for those who may not be familiar with what happened or what took place, we're going to give you some highlights and bring it right up till Friday afternoon with the sentencing. So, Mark, thanks for coming on and being willing to share this information with us.
Well, thank you, JT and Lady C. I've always been big fans of you guys, and I appreciate the respectful way you handle critical thinking and many subjects, broad and diverse. So thank you all for what you've been doing for years.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank
and
you.
Thank you for being here. We
Yeah,
appreciate you. We
absolutely,
appreciate
absolutely.
all the work you're doing as well. So,
Yeah, I mean that's
we're all one
you
big
put
team.
you put in some legwork and we appreciate that.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a sad but fascinating story about this case because it's not just about this case involving these two elders who were charged with violating Illinois' mandatory reporting law, but it goes a little deeper than that. It goes all the way back to the year 2006 when the elders in the Crystal Lake Spanish congregation became aware of child sexual abuse going on with a family in the Spanish congregation there in Crystal Lake. So what had happened was that a little girl that was between 6 and 7 years of age at the time had reported, well, actually what happened was she had started wetting the bed, which was very unusual behavior at that time for her. And her mother started questioning her, is everything okay? And, you know, what's going on? And ultimately, she asked her if someone was touching her and whether it was her father or someone else. And the little girl had told her mother that it was her father that was doing this. And again, this is back in 2006. So the mother is Latino and does not speak much English at all. And she was in this Spanish congregation. So her first inclination was to contact the local elders in the Crystal Lake Spanish congregation. And among those elders was Michael Penkava, one of the defendants, and Alfonso Majeca. And he is now deceased. Now, those two elders became advised of this child sexual abuse, and they did a couple of things. They met with Arturo Hernandez Pedraza, who is the abuser in this case. They met with him in the Kingdom Hall. They did receive a confession from him that he had indeed molested his daughter. And in fact, he confessed that he had done it at least 6 or 7 times that year alone. Now, that's what he confessed to. It may have been far more than that. But he confessed this to Alfonso and Michael Penkava, and I think Michael may have been the coordinator of the elders at the time. So he was handling things in that congregation. And we have a cat here. What happened then was that while they were still at the Kingdom Hall, they immediately contacted Watchtower Legal Department. This was in July of 2006. And so they contacted legal and they asked them what were their responsibilities. And they got an anonymous person on the phone from Watchtower Legal. And we don't know the name of that person. We don't know whether they were a licensed paralegal. What we do know is that they had claimed later to be a paralegal, but they were not licensed to practice in Illinois. They put the elders on hold, made a phone call to what they said was another lawyer or an actual lawyer working for Watchtower. And according to the notes that we have, they didn't reveal his name either, but it was later revealed during the investigation by state prosecutors. But at the time, those elders basically spoke to legal. The person that answered the phone, who was anonymous, went and asked an attorney, and then that attorney relayed information back to this anonymous person and said to those elders who called, that was Alfonso and Michael Penkava, said, "You are under no obligation to report this to the authorities." So at that point, it was just handled internally within the congregation. And interestingly enough, not long after, actually immediately, a judicial committee was formed. And in fact, the very next day, the other defendant was added to the judicial committee. That was Colin Scott. And once that judicial committee was formed, they met with the abuser, Arturo, and they decided to reprove him. And so they made a reproval announcement in the congregation, which I find interesting to this case, because normally elders, when conduct is of a judicial nature, such as sexual misconduct, and they actually treated this as adultery, we find out later in the trial, it happened on multiple occasions, and it was premeditated. So this is a classic case for disfellowshipping an individual. It's premeditated. It was a disfellowshipping offense. It happened on multiple occasions. Yet those elders actually determined that Arturo was remorseful and that he would never do it again. And so they only reproved him. So this was actually kind of shocking to me when I learned this. Meanwhile, nothing happened to Arturo except for the fact that he continued to molest his daughter after the reproval for another 12 years. And it wasn't just occasional touching. According to the state, in fact, during last Friday's final hearing on sentencing, the state pointed out that there were more than 300 occasions where this happened after 2006, all the way up to...
Wow.
Right, all the way up to about 2017 to 2018 when it was finally reported. In fact, actually, it was 2018 when the report, actually, at this point, the victim was over 18 years of age, and she felt that it was time for her to report. And Michael Penkava actually went with her to the police station, and he initially cooperated with the police, then later didn't. But what ended up happening was that on November 18th of 2020, actually, I'm going all the way to a year later. Let me just back up and say that the police investigated, arrested Arturo Hernandez Pedraza, and he was put on trial in 2019. And this is actually immediately after the Montana Supreme Court appeal for Watchtower. So I was dealing with that at the time, and at the same time this trial was going on of Arturo. He was found guilty. They did call Michael Penkava to the witness stand. He ended up invoking his clergy penitent privilege. He really initially obstructed he did obstruct the case because one of the things, as you know, is when you bring in someone who has knowledge and awareness of serious felony crimes that have occurred, and they raise their hand to the judge and say, "I can't answer those questions. I understand that I'm clergy and that I, do not have to answer these questions." Yeah. Whatever the law says, it's an obstruction of the legal process.
Yeah.
If you're a teacher, you couldn't do that. If you're a medical professional, you couldn't do that. So in the end, the judge made a split ruling that Mr. Penkava had to speak about the part where he was reproved, because that was a public announcement to the congregation. That was not included in privilege. but he couldn't speak about the confession that Arturo made to him and to Alfonso Majeca. So, boy, it was a tough situation.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Ultimately, yeah, the jury found Arturo guilty and sentenced him to nearly 50 years in prison. So
Wow.
he sits in an Illinois prison as a convicted felon. 1 year later is when this all started happening with these two elders. 1 year
Yeah.
later, Detective Idle of the McHenry County Police Department arrested Michael Penkava and Colin Scott on what's called a non-custodial arrest, meaning they didn't have to take them into custody, but they were arrested and charged with a Class A misdemeanor. Class A misdemeanor is the highest of all the misdemeanors in the state of Illinois, and that is punishable by up to a year in prison and a $2,500 fine, up to those two amounts.
Yeah. Mark, can I ask you a question? Because there's a couple of things you pointed out, and I think for our audience who may not be familiar with Jehovah's Witnesses and how they operate, when elders are asked to call the legal department, you mentioned that the person was anonymous. Could you just speak on how that process works? Because you're talking to somebody you don't know.
Well, there's not much to describe because it is anonymous. So what
Yeah.
happens is so elders are required to call the legal department before they speak to anyone. They don't speak to the service department first. They speak to the legal department whenever there's an allegation of child sexual abuse in a congregation. Whether it's true or not, any allegation is reported to the legal department. So the elders made that decision to call right away, and they did. And the legal department asks them questions to verify their identity. So they get their name, their congregation, the congregation number,
Yes.
their date of baptism, extensive information so that they
Yes.
can prove who they are.
Absolutely.
However, on the other end,
All right.
the Watchtower Legal Department does not divulge their name. The most they would give them is a 3-digit code.
Yes.
And usually that happens in the service department, like you have a code like SDK or something along those lines. In the legal department, it starts with the letter L. But generally, they don't even give them that. And they try to keep everything verbal only, especially now. They don't want to write anything up. Now, the service department, that's different. They will send limited letters back and forth between the service department. Once the legal department is finished with that phone call then gets transferred to the service department. And the service department is what guides those elders in what to do within the congregation itself if there's any question about how to handle a judicial case. Now, whether or not they... I can't say that the service department decided to reprove Arturo rather than disfellowship him. That was the decision that the local elders made, including Majeca and Colin Scott and Arturo, or rather Michael Penkava. They made that decision, but it was under the blanket and oversight of the service department.
Yeah, excellent point. And the second point that you mentioned, which is very important as well, how this case was somewhat unique because one of the things that elders are required to do is when they're handling a case, one of the questions that comes up in terms of disfellowshipping or not is often, is it a practice? Was this a one-time offense? I stopped by the lady's house and we got too close and it happened. Or was this every week? And so, as you mentioned, it's very unusual many times when something is a practice, especially when you consider that the practice involves someone who's family as well as someone who is a child. And the decision, as you mentioned, they came up with is that we're going to just reprove him. He feels sorry enough, so we'll just go ahead and reprove him. I thought that was an interesting point that you made about the decision by the body of elders was to simply reprove and not disfellowship.
I find it shocking because there are many cases where child abusers are disfellowshipped, and for those very reasons that it was a continued practice and premeditated. And sadly, it was what we learned later after he was finally arrested and the police went in and they searched the house, they searched the closets. This poor girl, I won't go into all the details of what
Oh,
happened
we
because it's
understand.
extremely graphic, but he had been purchasing multiple pregnancy tests for this girl in her later teen years. So, you know exactly what that means.
Yeah.
So it was not only premeditated, but he was also attempting to determine if his own daughter was pregnant from him, and he would have dealt with it however he would have dealt with it. Extremely sad that this went on for 12 years.
Yeah.
And
I'm going to tell you, Mark,
yeah,
it really shows the inconsistency in this organization. Let me just give you a perfect example. When we were at elder school, one of the questions that the instructor asked, and it was 900 elders sitting out there at that program in Alexandria, Virginia. He said to all the elders, he said, let me give you a scenario and tell us how you would make a decision on this. We was discussing a practice. He said, suppose a person goes over to someone's home and they engage in lovemaking, and then 2 hours later they engage in lovemaking again. Could you bring them up as a practice? And by a show of hands, and so most of the elders were like, "Nah, nah," and because you're thinking on maybe Monday and then go back on Friday. Well, the instructor explained to us, no, 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 no. You can bring them up on a practice the same night, just multiple times the same night, never even left the bed. Same. And so what that lets you know is
interesting.
this organization is so inconsistent in how it deals with these cases. And as we often tell people, when you walk in that back room, Mark, your life is in the hands of those three guys sitting across the table. That's exactly what it is.
Yeah, and even though they do give they do give the accused or the disfellowship person what is it, a week or two to appeal, that's a joke.
That's a joke. That's a joke.
The appeal committees. I'm sure you've talked about that many times.
It's really hilarious because oftentimes the appeal committee is selected by the circuit overseer, who selects elders from another congregation who are friends with the guys on the first case. And so many times you're now going to overrule those guys, knowing that down the road they may be sitting on an appeal case from your congregation. And so you have guys who are friends, buddies, and for most people who do an appeal, it's laughable. I mean, it's as they say, it's called kangaroo court for a reason.
Yeah. You don't want to cross the guys that you're playing golf with next
No,
week.
you don't. No, you don't. Oh man, that is amazing.
It's a tragic case. So, look, I have to hand it to the state of Illinois, and I'll say this many times. First of all, this has never happened before, where a state has filed criminal charges, and those charges led to a trial. This has never happened before. Now, in Delaware, it happened, but it was not a criminal charge. There were two elders who were similarly charged with a civil type misdemeanor around 2014, 2015, because these two elders did not report this multiple 40, 50 times of sexual contact between a 14-year-old Jehovah's Witness baptized boy and a 30-some-year-old baptized female assistant teacher. And so that teacher went to prison for 6 years. That Jehovah's Witness person went to prison. And then the state took a look at it and said, hang on a second, they violated our mandatory reporting statute. Now, that's very serious in Delaware because for those that don't know the story, Delaware was home to one of the worst cases of pedophilia and child abuse in United States history. And that was a case of a pediatrician who had molested 300 or 400, at least, children as young as 6 months of age.
Yeah, I remember that case.
Yeah. Earl, was it Bradley?
I think it was. Yeah,
it
was, and it was because it was so horrendous because he was a doctor who had complete access. I mean, it wasn't like the dirty old man with the coat on standing out in front of the school. This was the doctor. Parents literally brought their children in and handed him basically to them, and that was what made it so egregious.
Yeah, at the time, it was Bo Biden was the Attorney General for Delaware, the deceased son of Joe Biden, and he actually declined to take the vacated Senate seat of Joe Biden when Biden became president. because let's see if I'm getting the story straight. Beau Biden decided to stay. It was when Biden became vice president to President Obama, but he decided to stay to prosecute Bradley for these crimes and to see this thing through its completion. Now, the reason I bring all this up is because this was so serious in Delaware that Delaware changed their laws. And what they did was they said, look, if you're a mandatory reporter, whether you're a pediatrician, church official, whatever, elder, you will now face a fine of $10,000 for first offense, $50,000 for second offense if you fail to if you violate the reporting statute. Now, this wasn't a Class A criminal misdemeanor, meaning that these elders weren't going to go to jail, but it was going to trial. And this is where Watchtower swooped in. Back in 2015, they tried to use the clergy penitent privilege exception. The judge ruled against them. It was about to go to trial a year or so later. And all of a sudden, the whole thing disappeared because Watchtower came in and they signed, through the local attorney that represented these two elders, they signed a private settlement agreement with the state of Delaware. And they ended up paying $19,500, drop in a bucket to Watchtower. But they paid almost $20,000 for violating the state statute. They had to go through a mandatory child abuse training program, those elders in that congregation. That was just a one-day training program. And they had to send a letter to all of the congregations of Delaware advising them that they needed to report child abuse without violating that law from here forward. So that was the only other Jehovah's Witness or any case that was of its nature. This case is unique because the state of Illinois has filed criminal charges or violation of the reporting statute. And the attorneys inside that courtroom, I'm glad I was there because a significant amount of things happened, not only during the trial, but in between as the attorneys talked to each other. And these are all good attorneys, the attorneys for the elders and the state. You know, they were all very smart attorneys, very, very well trained in their professions. And one of the defense attorneys for one of the elders said during one of the breaks that he has never in his life, in all the years of practicing between him and his other co-counsel, had never seen a misdemeanor case result in a trial that has gone on for this long. And I shouldn't say a trial because the trial took place over 3 weeks, but
the whole case from start to finish,
start to finish. So, you know, this
about
was,
how long, I mean, for total about how long, because as you mentioned, it's one of the longest cases of this nature.
Here's a copy of November 18th, 2020 is when it started. I know this is probably not showing up real well, but this was the original charging report where one of the two elders, they both got this non-custodial arrest charge, but I'll just read you what it says. And these are public documents, and I'll be, releasing all this stuff soon. Some of it's out there already.
Great.
But it says, this is from Michael M. Penkava. The charge is that he knowingly failed to report to law enforcement his reasonable cause to believe that a child known to him in his professional capacity as a member of clergy was sexually abused by a parent. It's a Class A misdemeanor, and they cite the laws here, 720 ILCS 5/3-6J2. This is all available online. You can read these laws, and you can read the exceptions to the laws for clergy, which we can talk about in a few minutes. So,
in fact,
so to answer your question, November 18th, that's when this started. So this has been over 16 months.
Wow,
that this took place. Yeah.
In fact, that is something I would like to touch on. As you mentioned about them invoking the clergy rule, basically, as people who have been brought up as Jehovah's Witnesses, we are very familiar that is one of our core teachings that a Jehovah's Witness teaches, is that we do not have a clergy. So my question is, how were these elders able to argue something that everybody knows who's a witness that we don't even believe in? How would they? That was one of the things I thought was very fascinating. They argued so hard that we are like the Catholic Church. Unreal.
Well, it's look, you can define words in many different ways. There's words that are used colloquially and there's words that are used legally. And those are two different things. And the public has to be aware of that because I see a lot of anger on people's parts, especially ex-witnesses. There's an incredible amount of anger because they know that the Watchtower says we are not clergy. We're all ministers, but we are not clergy. What they do is cleverly say in court and elsewhere, they say, we do not have a clergy class. That's how they get around it. They say, we don't have a clergy class, but for purposes of reporting, we are clergy.
Yeah.
There's strategy to that. And here's why. Because look, if they don't say that they're clergy, right, then they don't have any exception to rely upon. They can't say we have the clergy exception. Because they know that the state is going to prove that they are members of clergy responsible for their church. But then the witnesses could come back and say, no, we have no clergy class, but they know they can't do that. They know they can't say they're not clergy. So then that comes into what's called 8803 in the state of Illinois. Now, this is the Illinois Statutes, Chapter 735, Civil Procedure 8-803, clergy. So 735 has to do with the law itself for reporting child abuse. 8-803 is the clergy exception. So let me explain how these things come about very briefly, sort of like a little education for the audience. So
it's very important because it's very important because we often confuse, and this is where the Watchtower is. I mean, these guys are good at this. This is the difference between some. I remember when we took a class, a pre-law. The first thing that the professor said, you need to understand the difference between what is morally right and wrong and what's legally. And the Watchtower, they shave that bacon so thin. Oh my goodness, it's amazing. Go ahead.
They're wordsmiths. So here's what's happened in the United States, and this has gone on since the 1970s, where sexual abuse crisis, as populations grown, as cities have grown, as sexual deviancy has grown. We started as a community, as a society, to see how very wrong it was to abuse children, even though, you would think we would have known that for decades or centuries. But we needed to, as a society, put rules, limitations on it. So, for example, how old is or how young is too young to have sex or sex with an adult? Okay, where do you draw the line between 13 years old, 14, 15, 16, 17? What's an adult? What's a child? Who should be allowed to have relations with one another? What's legal? What's not legal? Because you have to draw a line somewhere. Okay. So what started happening is, as the Catholic Church crisis started to escalate in the 80s and 90s, leading up to the Spotlight investigation with the Boston Globe, legislatures across the United States started adding mandatory reporting laws. So take for example, in Montana, we have several cases going there right now, civil cases. In the state of Montana, they added they created a law that basically said, now this is back in the 70s and 80s, the law said that everyone's a mandatory reporter, meaning that it's a general law. If you come to know that a child is being abused, you have an obligation to report it. Okay. So that really doesn't get enforced very well, because to police that is extremely difficult. It's so difficult that that's one of the reasons why in the United Kingdom, they have no mandatory reporting for anyone, for the most part. No teachers or clergymen or anyone, even doctors. And that's what we're trying to get past over in the United Kingdom. Is they're so far behind. They're where the United States was back in the 1970s. But here in the U.S., at least they added everyone as mandatory reporters. Problem is, it didn't work real well. So what they decided to do was step it up. And all the different states started doing it at different points in time, where they said, we're going to add teachers, we're going to add doctors, we're going to add clergymen, because these are people that people trust. These are these are the people that stand up in society and say, I want to teach kids, I want to protect kids, I want to teach them religion as a clergy member. So they really become responsible for the flock or for their students or patients. So that's when, in the case of, let's say, Montana in 1991, the legislature met and they decided to add clergy as members of the reporting class so that clergymen would have to report if they came to know of abuse. But then there's a whole big problem that comes along with that, because the churches step in, whether it's the Catholic or Lutheran or other churches, and they say, hold on a minute, you're violating the United States Constitution by saying that clergymen must report, because clergymen have an obligation to receive confidential confessions from their parishioners. So you're violating the First Amendment and the Establishment Clause of the United States Constitution. The Establishment Clause says basically that the state cannot form a religion or dictate the rules of a religion. They must be kept separate. So this is a very difficult problem. Now, that was in 1991 in Montana. Now, in Illinois, where this case took place, that argument didn't start happening until around 2001 to 2002. That's when the legislature got together and said, we want to add clergy as mandated reporters. Here's where the religions come in. So the religions step up and say, look, you cannot create a chilling effect upon our church because it's going to prevent people from confessing their sins. So here we have a conflict. We have the United States Constitution and the Establishment Clause, and we have the rights of the necessity for people to report when child abusers either confess to them or they become aware that there's child sexual abuse. So it's essentially it's a conflict between church and state. So in the case of Illinois, they had this debate. We have the legislative notes from that debate, and they were actually brought up at trial. But they said, okay, sure, you can add clergy as mandated reporters, but you've got to write an exception into that, because if someone gives a clergyman a confession, we don't want that to be triggering mandated reporting, because you're going to create a chilling effect upon people coming to their priest or their elders and confessing sins. Mm-hmm. This is a serious problem. So here's what was added. Ultimately, the decision came down to Procedure 8-803, clergy, and here's what it says. It says, a clergyman or practitioner of any religious denomination accredited by the religious body to which he or she belongs shall not be compelled to disclose in any court or any administrative board or agency to any public officer a confession or admission made to him or her in his or her professional character or as a spiritual advisor in the course of the discipline enjoined by the rules or practices of such religious body or of the religion which he or she professes, nor be compelled to divulge any information which has been obtained by him or her in such professional character as a spiritual advisor. So this is where the problem comes in. Yeah. How do you interpret that?
Yeah.
Here's what happened in Illinois. This is the short story of what happened. The judge ruled that the confession that Arturo Hernandez Pedraza made to the elders is sealed.
Okay.
That the elders cannot or need not waive their privilege. And by the way, privilege in the state of Illinois is a two-way privilege. It has to be waived. To waive it, it has to be waived by both the confessor, meaning this abuser, Arturo, and it has to be waived by the clergyman. Mm-hmm. So Mr. Michael Penkava refused to waive that privilege, and so did Arturo. If they had both said, yeah, we can talk about it, then it could have been used in this trial. However, here's where this whole trial was won, and this is the whole hinging of, this is what this case is all about. In addition to Arturo confessing, the wife of Arturo, the mother of this child, also spoke to the elders.
Okay.
And she revealed to the elders, including Michael Penkava and Colin Scott and others, she revealed what her daughter said to her. She said, my daughter's been wetting the bed, all of these things going on. She had told me that her father was sexually molesting her. This is 2006. Once she revealed to that, then that brings this law into question. Is that covered by what is called here a confession or admission made to him or her in his or her character as a spiritual advisor? Well, the issue is that the mother didn't confess anything.
Yeah, that's all the thing. She's not confessing.
She's not confessing. So to make a long story short, without getting into all the back and forth, because this is a massive battle that took place in the courtroom. In the end, the judge ruled ultimately on the first day of trial that the statements made by the mother were admissible at trial. And by the way, the mother had come in. There were a lot of pre-trial hearings that were held, and testimony was given pre-trial from December, January, February. On December 16th, two things happened. The mother came in and gave testimony in this public hearing. Well, actually, everybody was kicked out of that one because they were not sure whether her testimony would be admissible at trial. So they had to kick the reporters, everyone out. So the public was not.
Had to clear the courtroom. Yep.
Clear the courtroom.
Yeah.
She gave her testimony, and then they brought in John Miller, who is an attorney for Watchtower, not involved in this case, except behind the scenes he is. But
of course,
he was not party to this case. They brought him in to testify as to whether or not the Jehovah's Witness policy is to include the wife in the what he called confessional process of the Jehovah's Witnesses. They knew that they would win or lose this trial based upon what John Miller said or any other witnesses that were brought forth, because someone had to prove what the Jehovah's Witness confessional process, again, it's a word that doesn't appear in any elder's manual, but
that's true.
They had to prove, and this was our whole argument, is that a wife is critical to the penitent process of the abuser or anyone who is, let's say he committed adultery, because they essentially treated it as if he committed adultery with his own daughter,
his own child.
And yeah. So, but it didn't matter. It could have been an adult woman that he had. The argument that the Jehovah's Witnesses are making in order to save their butts is that the wife is a critical part of the process. So something very interesting happened.
Now that's it. Go ahead. This is going to be good.
Yeah,
it's going to be good.
So you mentioned to me.
So again, the argument is that the wife is part of the confession part on the part of a husband who's committed adultery. Is what they're arguing.
Yeah, that she is essential to the repentance of the accused or the abuser.
Okay.
So that means that what the Jehovah's Witnesses are trying to do is throw the wife into this process to prove that any statements that she made to the elders were also part of the confessional process and not just the statements of Arturo. Because they knew they would lose this case if the wife's statements, because here's the bottom line. What the wife said to these elders is not privileged, and therefore, because it's not privileged, that triggered the mandatory reporting law.
Mandatory reporting law.
She wasn't confessing anything. She was relaying to the elders.
The wife had done nothing. Yeah.
So this is where Watchtower played their tricks, because behind the scenes, now these are the attorneys for the elders were not Jehovah's Witnesses. One of them cussed like a sailor out in the hallways. He's a very good attorney, but he was dropping F-bombs like left and right. And I find that interesting because, his client was standing right outside the door, not too far away, as he was cursing up a storm with these other attorneys. But behind the scenes, he later admitted after this trial was all, we went to sentencing and he came out, and I'll talk about this later, but, he admitted the involvement of people like John Miller, Joel Taylor, and others in the Watchtower legal department. So we knew that there was a lot more going on behind the scenes.
Oh, absolutely. Wow.
So so the wife, so that whole thing happened. Now, I mentioned to you there were a lot of delays. I mean, look, this took place.
This thing's been dragging on forever. I mean, it's like,
there were multiple motions. Now, COVID did slow it down a little bit, but not this much. Yeah, not this much. In fact, the original trial, I had already booked a flight last March because the trial date was set for almost the same time as this March. And I booked, canceled, booked, canceled, booked, canceled. It was scheduled for March. Then there were issues involving the Jehovah's Witnesses, and they were not responsive to the subpoenas for the Judicial Committee documents, for example. They didn't want to turn them over. And they had a big court battle that went on all last year for these Judicial Committee documents. And ultimately, I think the judge did end up getting them himself. They're not public documents, so we can't see the Judicial Committee notes. They're protected. But the trial was scheduled for March, then it was scheduled for June, then it was scheduled for September. I've never booked and canceled so many flights in my life.
Yeah.
But because of the delays and because of what these elders did, and also there were other elders involved, such as the secretary of the congregation, who they subpoenaed to turn over the documents. And of course, he didn't turn over the responsive documents.
No,
so these delays went on in what one of the attorneys for the defense called the longest misdemeanor case he's ever seen in his life. It's a misdemeanor. It's not even a felony case.
It's classic. Yeah, it's a misdemeanor. Yeah.
Because of these delays, which were ultimately the fault of the elders and Watchtower behind the scenes, along comes a man by the name of Bradley Kelm from Illinois. When this case started, this man was presiding overseer of an Illinois congregation, fully serving that congregation back in 2020. And here's what happened. During the course of all of this, he was waking up. And by November of 2021, last November, he resigned as an elder. He was not disfellowshipped. He hasn't come out as an apostate, anything like that, except privately to his friends. And he comes along and resigns as an elder and realizes there's some very serious things going on with child abuse. And he has his own story to tell, which I will not tell, but he, he'll reveal himself when the time is right.
Oh, absolutely.
And I can use his name with his permission. I have. Yeah. And also his name is now part of the public record because it's in these documents. It's in the court transcripts.
His story gets told. His story gets told.
Yes, indeed. So November, he resigns. Within a month or so, by December, he becomes aware of this case. And I'm just going to shorten this whole thing up. And I'm going to say that he came forward by February and went into court and testified for the prosecution as a rebuttal testimony to John Miller. And what he revealed was so critical to this case that the judge ultimately, in his ruling, in his final verdict, which I'll read to you because it's not that long, we'll read it in a minute, but in his final ruling, he said, and I'll just read this one sentence right now from this, if I can locate it. He said, this is what the judge said. This is the final verdict. This is a portion of it. He said, I find Mr. Kelm's testimony more credible than Mr. Miller's regarding the role of the innocent spouse, including the court's earlier analysis of Exhibit 16-1, which was used only for the determination of admissibility of the statements, particularly the mother of the victim and the wife, the abuser. So here's this elder that comes at the last hour, at the moment when the state needed him the most. If you were a witness and something like this happened, you would say, this is Jehovah's direction. Witnesses love to do that because it could not have happened at the more perfect time. This man was an elder from Illinois. He had served both as a coordinator or presiding overseer and as a secretary at various times, including the pertinent time of 2006. He had a vast knowledge of the Jehovah's Witness confessional process because he had been, in fact, he's been a witness longer than Jehovah's Witnesses attorney John Miller, who came in later in life. So he had a lot more experience as a witness and as an elder. He's been involved in many judicial cases, and he's been through many kingdom ministry schools, and he's read all of the elders' letters and, of course, all of the elders' manuals, including the 1991 manual, which was pertinent to this case. The judge immediately, when he testified before trial, the judge ruled that he was an expert witness. They had to certify him. They had to accept his testimony because the judge certified him as an expert witness. And he testified the opposite of what John Miller said, and said that the wife was not part of the confessional process. But that is a separate issue from the elders meeting with the abuser and receiving his confession. And I think, as you guys know, and you've probably talked about it before, is that when you have a situation where you have the man who is the head of the house and he's involved in a judicial hearing because of what he did, the wife's not there.
Tell it. It's
the other way around.
Go ahead and tell it, Mark. Go ahead and tell it.
If it's the other way around and the wife is being called to a judicial committee, the husband is allowed to come into that because he's the head of the house. Kelm did a great job.
Man, that is one of the most fascinating positions that the organization holds. And that elder was definitely key because the watchtower is arguing, the lawyers are arguing that the wife is important when a husband is involved in a case like that. And the reality is the elders will not even tell her what her husband was in there for. Conversely, he's going to be sitting right there beside her when she's in there for the same identical thing. Man, that's just amazing. And see, this is like I tell people all the time, this is the whole point. And you and I, we've had this discussion. I've had this discussion with other people. For us, especially here at Critical Thinkers, that is the point. People get the chance to move the curtain to the side and see exactly how things take place in this argument. Because the judge and anyone there, they would have heard the Watchtower representative give this wonderful speech, thinking and walking out saying, "Oh, that makes sense. Okay." When in reality, man, we know that does not fly. And this is what these type of cases do, man. They snatch that curtain down and bring the curtain rod and everything else down with it. It's serious. So
they're making up rules. They're making up rules as they go, JT.
So what now?
They're making up rules as they go, and they bent the rules. Yeah, they bent the rules for this case, and I think ultimately what we're going to see as a result of this, I guarantee, is mark my words as a prediction, we're going to see a change in the Elders Manual.
Oh yeah,
they're going to add a section in there regarding the confessional process. They're going to probably use that phrase. They're going to add the fact that the wife, because this is killing them. It's killing them in court, and it's killed them in this case. They lost this case. They're going to appeal it, but they lost this case because of that loophole in their own system where they didn't fill that gap, and they didn't say that the wife is part of the confessional process. They really don't want to be using those terms because it sounds too much like the Catholic Church, and we know how much they hate the Catholic Church.
Yeah. Now, Mark, let me ask you this, because this is really probably the crux of this particular case. For years, this is probably the first case that I'm aware of where elders are being brought into court. We've seen all around the world where elders often end up being in court because they're being persecuted, they can't preach, and this and that. And as a result, the courtroom will be packed with Jehovah's Witnesses supporting the elders because we stand behind our brothers. Can you describe what it was like in this type of case where it involves child abuse issues? What was the courtroom look like in terms of Jehovah's Witnesses?
So I'm glad you asked that question because I can tell you this, that first of all, local Jehovah's Witnesses, for the most part, don't know about this. Now, I think that after 4 newspaper articles in the largest newspaper in Illinois, or in this is the Northwest Herald. But look, Amanda Marazzo, I want to give a shout out to her because she's done a great job. She really has. She's been covering this case, and I want to mention this. She had left Shaw Media for a while and came back. She was the original reporter that covered the criminal trial of Arturo Hernandez Pedraza when he was sentenced to almost 50 years in prison for that. She was at that trial, and we've had a lot of discussions about what happened at that trial, and it was really good that she was there and covered this story. But so she's been covering this since. Here's trial underway. Now this would be March the 3rd. So it's inside, but you can see the reference to the trial underway regarding the Jehovah's Witnesses. And in fact, and I'm sort of answering your question because, look, a lot of the witnesses are just they're not reading the media. But they're in a precarious predicament. My fingers here are on Mike Penkava, and that's Colin Scott. Now, he only appeared in court a few times. He didn't appear at trial. He's almost 89 years old. He was allowed to sit in his easy chair at his home in Crystal Lake, appearing on Zoom before the judge. Yeah. Anyway, so that was the first article, because I want people to know how much media there was of this, and it wasn't a lot, but it was enough that if witnesses had read, they would have known. This made the front cover of the Northwest Herald. Verdict on the horizon, and this is where this is basically the second day of trial. And to give you guys an idea, it was 3 days of trial. This is a bench trial, and it's called a bench trial because a year ago, or more than a year ago, when we knew that this was going to go to trial, the defendants have a choice. They can either opt to have a trial by jury, that's their constitutional right to have a jury of their peers judge them, or they can have what's called a bench trial. And it was very clear that they chose a bench trial because a jury would have murdered these guys.
Oh, yeah.
Most likely.
Yeah,
just like they did in Montana in the civil trial.
Yeah.
You know, they
juries don't like anybody who's holding back information regarding kids. You're fighting a serious uphill battle with that. Yeah.
Yeah, that was
amazing.
This is there were 2 state's attorneys involved, including an elected official, Pat Keneally, and also Asher Uash. So here's Patrick Keneally. His arguments were just incredible. I mean, I don't know if I've ever seen. I've seen it before at trial, in civil trials, and even criminal trials. But I mean, the passion that these men showed for protecting children and enforcing the law, a law that if you ignore this law, a child could be abused for a dozen more years, as this child was, very true. and be affected the rest of her life. I mean, come on. This was the third article. Ahead of hearing, this is one where after they were found guilty, there was a motion to the court for a new trial for Colin Scott, because he's the elder that was added to the Judicial Committee after the confession of Arturo Hernandez Pedraza. So his claim is that, I didn't call Watchtower. I wasn't part of that. That was the other elders. So
he was the third man on the committee. He's third
right.
man. He's third
Even
man
though
out.
he knew about it, he could have picked up the phone and called. Any one of those elders could have called. In fact, I'll point this out too. In the very closing arguments here of sentencing, the state very correctly pointed out that any of these men could have called DCFS anonymously. They didn't have to call Watchtower. They could have called DCFS anonymously, and all they had to say was, I work with the church. I'm aware that there are serious allegations of child sexual abuse going on with XXX. Please investigate. Click.
Yeah.
That triggers the investigation. That would have saved 12 years of child rape.
12 years.
12 years of child rape. The defense wants to speculate. The defense, Terry Eckel, for Colin Scott, the attorney for Colin Scott, said, well, we can't speculate. That's all pure speculation. We don't know if it had been reported, whether or not this child would have been saved from all this sexual abuse.
Yeah.
All speculation.
Yeah,
Finally,
they insult the intelligence of the orders. So now with
this is the final article.
Yeah, go ahead. Mm-hmm.
It is not okay to do what these elders did. This is what the state argued at the sentencing hearing. They asked for a lot of things. I can give you a list of what they asked for. I think some of those things are mentioned here in this article, but this is a photo.
And that's what I wanted to ask you about. Now, once the conviction was, they were convicted for what they failed to do, they go into the sentencing phase. What was it like for the sentencing that day, that Friday when you went in and what you saw?
Yeah.
You could share that with us. I would appreciate that.
Yeah, because I really didn't answer your question yet. I will say this. Now, remember, these men this all happened. The crimes occurred in the Spanish Crystal Lake Congregation of Jehovah's Witnesses. Now, Colin Scott, the one elder, 88, 89 years old now, he had served in Medellin, Colombia, as basically as a need grader for years. He was involved in the Spanish work. And the picture we have up on screen, that's the Crystal Lake, both English and Spanish Congregation of Jehovah's Witnesses, where they both served for however many years. I don't know the exact number. But they both spoke Spanish, served in this congregation, were there to protect the children and the entire congregation, and yet look what happened. So I want to point the attention to what I saw in that courtroom. First of all, none of the witnesses showed up to support them until sentencing. And it was on the third floor of this very nice Justice Center in McHenry County. This is about 20 minutes from where the crimes occurred in Crystal Lake. I traveled to all the places involved, the homes of the elders, the Kingdom Hall, obviously the courthouse, and other places involved in this case. And inside that courthouse works not only Patrick Keneally, but this man. This is Asher Uesh. He's the one that made the incredible, impassioned plea to make this sentence count, to send a message to the Jehovah's Witnesses, he said, that it's not okay to cover up child abuse. It's not okay to violate the reporting statute, that we have this statute for a reason, to protect children. You can't just hide behind this clerical privilege to claim that, oh, it's your right. It's your right. And what does the scripture say? Some things are doable or acceptable or whatever the word is, but not all things are advantageous. Yeah. All things are lawful.
All things are lawful, but everything is not advantageous. Yes, that's so true.
It is not advantageous to a young girl. Remember the scripture that talks about Jesus and the little children walking up to him. What would Jesus do?
That's the question.
As a person who claims to be Christian, what would Jesus do?
Yeah.
You have these people coming up and needing protection. So yes, all things are it was lawful. It was lawful for them.
Yeah.
I mean, now we know it was not lawful for them to do what they did, but they claimed that it was lawful, but it was not advantageous to this child. Ruined this child.
Like we had talked before, that hot dog company we often see advertised here in the United States, they make the statement that, we have to appeal to a higher authority for the type of sausages and the type of meats that we make. And so that's really the point, is that it's not just the law of the land, but if as a Christian, you should be appealing to a higher law.
Well, let me answer your question, though, because I still didn't answer your question.
Go ahead.
I'm going to tell you in that courtroom. Day 1, no witnesses in that courtroom. Day 2, no Jehovah's Witnesses. Day 3, no Jehovah's Witnesses. Even for the guilty verdict, none, okay? The sentencing came. This is where they were all worried that this man was going to go to jail. The state, JT, you've heard of the day for a year rule?
Yeah.
The state, as this is, kind of funny because of the Bible prophecy thing, but the state
only in Wally World. I know.
Well, it was the state's decision to say this, that they knew they weren't going to get a year from the judge, but the state said, I want a day for a year, 1 year or 1 day in prison for every year that this child was abused after 2006. So they asked for 12 days of prison for both defendants. Ultimately, the judge didn't allow that. And he gave them a year probation, a $250 fine, and 10 days of community service. But to finally answer your question about who was in that courtroom, 12 Jehovah's Witnesses showed up, and I looked closely as much as I could because they were on one side of the courtroom. None of them had showed up previously. In fact, the only person that Penkava had to talk to the entire trial were his attorneys and the wife of his attorney.
Wow.
She was there for the whole thing, and probably she was there to maybe deflect people from approaching him, because I didn't know what to expect. People could have gone up to him. He said hi to me. I mean, the guy's actually a nice guy, and I've looked him straight in the eye many times in that courtroom. The guy's not a bad guy. What he did was wrong. But here's the point I wanted to make. those people in the courtroom, remember all the years he was in Crystal Lake Spanish congregation, I did not see a single Latino
Oh, wow.
in that courtroom to support him. Not one. It was all white Anglo-Saxon Americans.
But it's even from the English side.
I mean, all those years he spent, and Colin Scott, doing work in the Latino community for Jehovah's Witnesses, not a single one. And I would argue that most of them don't know about this except for the mother and daughter.
Yeah.
And a handful of other people, because they knew Arturo was reproved and you know how gossip spreads. But I wonder what they really think. I can tell you what those people in the courtroom, you know, after I can read you the statement of what, off the record, what Attorney Prosnitz, the attorney for Penkava, said.
But you know, I'm gonna tell you, Mark, it's very, you know, two things can happen. Some people, they are thinking, some former witnesses, and I understand their concern. You know, they look at cases like this and they'll say basically one of two things. You know, this is something that's going to bring the watchtower down. This is something that's going to change my mama and daddy's viewpoint. But unfortunately, man, I mean, I'm just being, and this, you know, this is just based on my experience. The watchtower always prepares its people. See, they've already been given the talks that if you hear anything from the news, in the paper, TV, that's about us, that's negative, just tell yourself it's a lie. They just lying about it. So the witness has already been conditioned and prepared to anything that comes down the pike that is negative to automatically reject it. And that's what makes it such a challenge, trying to help people who are part of a high control group. The group has already conditioned its followers as to how to view anything that could be looked at as a possible stop and rethink, reevaluate moment. They'll just brush it off. And that is so sad. And that is really one of the biggest challenges I know that we and others who have families are still in, trying to get people to, you know, take a look at this. I don't have to. I know it's all lies, but you haven't read it. Listen to the transcript. It's all a lot. But the brother said it sitting on the stand. I don't care. I mean, I've actually had people tell me that they did not want to read the transcript, and the transcript was what the elder or what the witness said. That's just how far along they are in this conditioning. And man, it is amazing. But from the sentencing, you said that they were given basically what some of you as a slap on the wrist. But here's the question, though, and this is the most important part. What does this let people who are serving as elders fully see now?
Well, so they whether if they were to find out about this, especially in Illinois, because remember, every state's different, and every state has a different 8-803 law where the verbiage might be different. So maybe it applies, maybe it doesn't apply. It's going to have to be adjudicated in other states, and other states are going to have to do what the state of Illinois did in order to make this happen. I mean, they're not going to prosecute every case. I mean, they, you know, look, unfortunately, the misdemeanor and felony trials, we have prisons full of men and women. We have crimes. We're putting men in prison for smoking marijuana. You know, I mean, just crazy stuff. But they're full, and look, they can only handle so many items on the docket.
Oh, yeah, that's true. Yeah.
This cost Illinois a lot of money. It cost Watchtower a lot of money, because these are very high priced, very good lawyers. They're very respected lawyers in Illinois that were defending these elders. So we have to consider that. But to answer your question, elders should think twice about this, because it could be them next.
Yes, that's exactly the point. And this is you know, for the first time I've seen, you know, in my life and being ever involved with the witnesses, where elders are now, they could be walking around with targets on their back. And what's kind of interesting is, as you know, the society's lawyers were not the ones who were defending them. There were other lawyers and law firms that had to defend these people. So it is very interesting to see what's going to happen as we go on, because one thing is for sure, the views around the world in different governments, legislative bodies, has changed when it comes to this type of issue, and their countries are not taking this for no joke anymore. And so if you find yourself in a reporting position and you fail, it could cost you your freedom. I mean, this is no joke. This is no joke.
And you know, JT, you have to ask yourself the question, what's the downside? What would have happened to Mike? Yeah. So what we know to be a fact is the downside would be what? That if he had gone ahead and made that phone call to DCFS,
yeah,
he could have or likely would have lost his position as an elder.
Oh yeah.
And or worse. So
true.
You have his position as an elder, you have the welfare of a then 7-year-old girl whose whole life is ahead of her. Her father is raping her and went on to rape her. And he knew that that was a risk. And they actually did warn, according to what they stated, they did warn other members of the congregation after 2006 that this man was a danger to children without giving all the details. Congregation was on notice about this. The elders knew what he had done. They only reproved him. He was still free to interact. And and this was interesting. And I will have to get the exact verbiage of this, but the state very passionately argued. I mean, when he was making this statement, let me tell you, with a booming voice, Mr. Uash said, "What about the non-Jehovah's Witness children? You're only trying to protect the Jehovah's Witness children, and even then they can't protect them. But what about this man still had full access because they didn't call the police. He had full access to all the other children. This guy was a construction worker. He worked some days. He didn't work other days. So he'd go home. His wife wasn't there. She was hard at work. She barely spoke English at all. She had to have a translator at trial, the original trial of Arturo. This man could go home and rape his daughter anytime he wanted to the point where he was giving her pregnancy tests.
Yeah. And
police found him in the closet. All because this man made a phone call to this anonymous. I tell you what, if we have time, I'd like to read the verdict.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'd like people to hear what the judge said.
Go ahead.
This is the previous. This is not the sentencing. This is the previous week when these men were found guilty. Because I know it's not the sentencing that we all would have liked to have seen. Okay, but it's a start. This is a good start. This is the final ruling of the judge on Friday, March 18th, 2022. Now, this happened at about 6:05 p.m. This is the latest that we've been in court there because the judge took an hour and 5 minutes to deliberate with himself over all the facts of the case. And here's what he said. The court is now prepared to rule. Please forgive me if I go slowly or perhaps jump around a bit.
Go ahead.
The court, that's not me talking, that's the judge.
Oh, I'm sorry.
The judge said that.
I'm sorry, Mark. I apologize.
That's all right, JT.
I apologize.
I know it's not, you weren't expecting this. This is what the judge said, and I'm quoting until I say unquote, this is what the judge said. He said, please forgive me if I go slowly or perhaps jump around a bit. The court has considered all proper evidence and testimony considered, and the arguments of counsel and finds as follows. The court incorporates its findings regarding the motion for directed finding now, when no longer considering them in the light most favorable to the non-moving party. And the evidence supporting those findings have been proved beyond a reasonable doubt. The mother told defendants and Mr. Alfonso Majeca, all three elders and clergy, in July 2006, information she learned from her daughter that her daughter was sexually abused by Arturo Hernandez Pedraza. The defendants had an obligation to report under the then effective reading of 325 ILCS 5/4. The real question is whether or not they had to report. The real question is whether or not the clergy penitent privilege trumped that obligation. Concerning Arturo Hernandez Pedraza, the privilege did and still does exist between the elders and Arturo Hernandez Pedraza. Mr. Arturo Hernandez Pedraza has not waived that privilege. No privilege exists between the mother, Mrs. Hernandez, and the defendants. In deciding so, I do not find defendant Penkava's testimony to be credible in light of his stipulations. His testimony in 18 CF 1057, his statement to Detective Idle, and Eloina's statement. That's the mother. I find, this is the elder, I find Mr. Kelm's testimony more credible than Mr. Miller's regarding the role of the innocent spouse, including the court's earlier analysis of Exhibit 16-1, which was used only for the determination of admissibility of the statements, particularly the mother's. The mother's statement is credible, corroborated by stipulations 6 and 8, and in defendant Penkava's case, by his statement to Detective Idle. Mr. Scott's defense of, quote, "I was not present," falls flat in that it relies upon the shifting sands of Mr. Penkava's testimony and is contradicted by the mother's statement and stipulations 6, 7, and 8. Regarding knowingly and willfully, this must be proved and adopted. He said, I commented and adopted that finding from earlier. The defendants chose not to contact DCFS. This was knowingly and willfully, and is the requirement that's correctly argued by Mr. Keneally, the state. So far as the defense of the state, the defendant's evidence does not match or prove any of the reasonable belief requirements enumerated in 720 ILCS 5.4/-8. Concerning the defense of bad legal advice, this defense is based solely on hearsay from 2006 from no known party, of unknown legal licensing, of unknown experience, unknown accreditation, basically of unknown anything other than a belief by Mr. Penkava that this person was a lawyer whose hearsay information is relayed to him after a children's game of telephone. This defense carries no weight. I still agree, as Mr. President has argued multiple times, that the state cannot define one's religion. I still agree that religion cannot define the state's statute. The analysis of what Eloina told the defendants, this is the mother, is confused by what Mr. Prosnitz calls the confessional process, or they may call it church discipline. This ignores that the mother did not confess, that there is no clergy penitent privilege between the defendants and the mother, and ignores the independent information she has provided the defendants from her daughter. If confessional process in this matter is not bootstrapped with independent information learned by the defendants after Arturo's confession into Arturo's privilege, or create a new privilege with the mother. Therefore, the state has met its burden and both defendants are found guilty. And that's it. I think that it's important to remember this one statement. We haven't really talked about this yet, and maybe it's a subject for a future discussion, but one of the defenses that was argued was bad legal advice. And in fact, that was something that the state had argued against last year in pretrial motions. There was a whole thing that went back and forth between both sides in the court regarding whether or not the defense would be allowed to argue advice of counsel. Now, advice of counsel is where you basically go and say to someone, oh, my lawyer told me to do this. I'm not at fault because I received professional counsel. So you have it up on screen. This is great. And we'll read this one more time because this is what the elders ultimately were claiming, that they got bad legal advice. They actually threw Watchtower legally under the bus. Concerning the defense of bad legal advice, this defense is based solely on hearsay from 2006 from no known party of unknown legal licensing. You know, they're talking about these men who were in the legal department of Watchtower who refused to give their names. And as we've discovered later, neither those men nor the attorney that they contacted had any legal license to practice in the state of Illinois. It goes on to say of unknown experience, unknown accreditation, basically of unknown anything other than a belief by Mr. Penkava that this person was a lawyer whose hearsay information is relayed to him after a children's game of telephone. I don't think you can find a harsher statement about the advice of counsel defense and Watchtower's policies by saying it that way.
Yeah.
That carries no weight, and it was a children's game of telephone. It was not a professional consultation with
I mean, basically they said that the Watchtower is not even a professional organization that carries on this way. That is so amazing. You know, we just want to thank, you know, some of our super chat, Jane.com and Mary for their contribution. as well. Mark, do you have just a couple of minutes left? Because some people had some questions. I just want to
Yeah,
get there was a couple of questions.
let's take some
Lady
questions.
C, I think she was kind of monitoring some of the questions. Any questions that that you want to pose to Mark, Lady C? So she can come back on.
She's been hiding in the wings.
She's been hiding, I know, right?
She's doing all the real work.
I know, right? Let's see if she has
Hey.
any questions. How you doing? Any
Okay.
questions that you want to put before Mark?
There was a lot of statements that were being made.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah, a lot of
A
statements.
lot of emotion, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, people. I'm just looking through some of the comments. I mean, people are just amazed at the level of incompetency, the disgust at how much the Watchtower. I guess for me, Mark, is it, you think in terms of how, as a witness, you celebrate truth. I mean, not the truth, but you celebrate truth. We want to know what's accurate, what's correct, and what's right. And then we go out and knock on people's doors and we tell our Bible study. And then at the end of the day, to find out that you are literally part of an organization that truth don't really matter much. Doesn't really matter much at the end of the day. That is so sad. That is just so sad.
Somebody left a message and said something about that they heard them openly tell the congregation not to call the police if your child says they are molested.
Wow.
Oh,
Well, that's anecdotal. I mean, maybe that happened somewhere, but we hear a lot of anecdotal stories from people, and some are true, or maybe some are miscommunications. Who knows? But when we get things in writing and we go to courts, that's when the stakes are that much higher in civil and criminal courts. They got to provide the evidence. Look, they brought John Miller. That guy. I met him in Philadelphia. He was defending Watchtower in the Fessler case, and after 4 days of trial, it was going horribly. And they wrote a very large check to Stephanie Fessler because they had covered all this up. They didn't report. They violated Pennsylvania mandatory reporting statutes on congregations in Maryland and Pennsylvania in that case. And they ended up losing that case. But, these guys are just kind of backslapping each other and saying, good job, good job. Attorney for Michael Penkava came out, and actually, I don't think they were counting on me sitting in the hallway listening to the conversation, because it was a very loud conversation after the sentencing. And he said, man, you did the right thing. I even typed up a couple of things he said. I mean, it was just shocking. I know a few people have commented on this when I tweeted, I think, a couple of the comments that were said here. And by the way, to conclude this, this is not a concluded case because, number one, even though they're convicted and they're under 1 year of supervision from the court, if they do it again, it's a felony. Okay. And they may receive a stiffer penalty, obviously. But, secondly, attorneys, and it's mentioned in the Northwest Herald, those attorneys have spoken to Amanda Marazzo with the Northwest Herald and indicated that in all likelihood they will appeal this, and that means it's going to go to the second appellate court probably around January of next year. The second appellate court in Illinois is the appellate court for this court. If these elders lose and the trial is upheld, or the ruling is upheld, then they may choose to go to the Illinois Supreme Court. At that point, if constitutional issues are raised and they go against the elders, it could be submitted to the United States Supreme Court. So you're going to start seeing more Watchtower attorneys or even constitutional attorneys. You'll probably start seeing Paul Polidoro get involved at the constitutional level if it goes to the Supreme Court of Illinois. And so
this is going to be interesting. And so for me, Mark, what I think is the most important thing, as they say, when you put sunshine on things, that's revealing. As long as things are in the dark, in the back, you can't see it. But this is part of the process for people when they have to decide, do I want to become involved with Jehovah's Witnesses? When people can see for themselves that someone fights so hard to keep such information quiet, that speaks for itself. That speaks for itself. That is why most people have a sense of right and wrong. And when it comes to children, they do not make excuses for any organization who attempts to hide behind legal jargon. It has never worked for any organization, especially on this subject. It just does not work.
Let me throw the question back on you and Lady C, because here's what I want to throw this back on you, because the question is always asked, why? Why do they do this? I remember the first trial I attended, one of the very experienced trial lawyers turned to me in the middle of the trial when we took a 5-minute recess, and he looked at me, and I was helping the civil attorneys for Miss Fessler, but he said, "Why, Mark? Why are they doing this?" You know, he knew he was fighting this, and he knew they were going to win it. But he said to me, why? Why are they doing this? This is absurd. So my next statement would be, compare them to other religions, okay? In fact, it's funny, a woman at the hotel I stayed at over the past 4 weeks, she got so interested in this case, she started saving all the newspaper articles for me, including one that came out in the middle of the week that I wouldn't have had access to because I wasn't in Chicago in the middle of the week. I only had the weekend papers. But she got very interested, and she was talking about, you know, her group she belongs to and how, like, she couldn't believe. And she even asked me, what do I think about what other faiths think about this? But look, I've done a little investigating. I think we all know about how the Catholic Church has handled things. They've actually, as bad as it was, they've apologized. They've changed policies. Right here in Baltimore, Maryland, you have the Archdiocese had made a full apology on their website and said, we're doing the best we can. We're sorry for covering this up, etc. There are people who care, and they're not controlled by the Pope. The Pope doesn't tell the local archdiocese, no, you can't say this, all right? These archdioceses have a little bit of leeway in what they can say in Boston, Baltimore, and so forth. So then I started looking into the Seventh-day Adventist Church, the SDA. They've had their share of problems, but very few. Now, they have 3 times the number of members of Jehovah's Witnesses, and they have thousands of schools. It's a really big number worldwide. So they have a big concern for children. And the number of sexual abuse cases is tiny. Why is that? Okay. So what I've learned is that they immediately address the issue. They've created policies in place because they have schools, which the witnesses don't have schools for children, which they love to say that we don't, because that protects them. But they have rules such as the 2-adult policy. Okay, we have witnesses have the 2-witness, but the Seventh-day Adventist Church says in any school or otherwise environment, their church elders manual says you will not allow a child to be with 1 adult. It has to be 2 or more adults with a child, and they've also published the money that they spent defending themselves in child sexual abuse lawsuits. They made it open and clear, published it, completely transparent. So the question for you guys is, and I mean, you've been commenting on this, you know, probably in your hundreds and hundreds of videos, but what do you think? You know, why are the Jehovah's Witnesses different from everyone else when it comes to this? Because this is not a biblical, I mean, they make it a biblical, you know, they quote 1 Corinthians 6, but why do you guys think that it's different with the witnesses?
That's an excellent question. And in fact, that's the same question I have that's the same question I have asked myself. And the reason why is because I always looked at it that you would, and this is why I mentioned at the very beginning of the broadcast. If you go back like 20 some years into the older, back in about 20, 25, 30 years ago, when other churches were having this issue, the Watchtower was scathing. And so you would have thought that the Watchtower would have said, yes, we have this problem, but look at us in terms of how we are handling it as an example for other religions to do. Where in fact, the Watchtower did exactly the opposite. I mean, they dug down deeper than any other religion. I mean, right in the Catholic Church, some of the leading voices about the issue of this child abuse issue are people who are Catholic. I mean, they have literally organizations that have formed of Catholic members who say, we're going to hold our church responsible. In this organization of Jehovah's Witnesses, man, you need this fellowship in 30 seconds.
They break that group up.
And so they have a system in place that will shut you down. And when you have a system in place that can shut any dissenting voice, then nobody's going to peek their head up and get shot. And so, and then too, looking at, from a biblical perspective, the Bible makes the point that, there would come a time when people would offer you up, kill you, and think they did a service to God. And so the organization oftentimes will do things and think this is what God would want us to do. And this organization is probably the reason. Every Jehovah's Witness is taught you defend the organization at all costs. Elders have told so many parents, so many little kids, look, this is something that'll be fixed in the new system. We understand you got emotional trauma, but don't worry about it. The end is almost near. You'll be fixed in the new system. Just wait on that phrase, wait on Jehovah. That is the ultimate catchphrase. I mean, think about this. I was just talking to my wife this morning. You go to a restaurant or you go to any business and you're upset about the service or whatever. And all of a sudden, one of the senior managers comes out and says, look, hold on 1 second. Just give me a minute. I'll take care of it. We're going to fix this. Well, at that point, you're not going to keep shouting and going off because the guy just told you he's going to fix it in a couple of minutes. So you just calm on down. Okay, that's good. See, he's going to take care of this. He's going to take care of this. Same thing as organization, man. We are told, don't worry about
Except it never happens.
Now that's the catch. And that's the point. And so the ability to lower the temperature on issues that should be hot, the organization is a specialist at that. And they basically can rock the Jehovah's Witness back to sleep again. And that's what happened. And we see that. I mean, I stress this so much. Lady C and I, we encourage every person. If there's nothing else you do, go to your community college, take at least an online class on psychology, 1 or 2 semesters, and get with your professor so that they could help you to better understand how a high control group works. We complain all the time that Jehovah's Witnesses are called high control group, and then we get upset when they do high control stuff. You need to understand this is what they do. You are seeing it up front and close with your mama, your daddy, your sister, and your brother. This is what a high control group does. They make their members to the point where they are unable to literally think of some of the most simple and rational things. You would think it would be a great idea to turn in someone who's molesting a child. Not if it's going to make the Kingdom Hall look bad. We ain't doing that. And that's how it works. That is the whole point of why it's important to shine sunlight. Even if laws are not passed, I think it's important that sunlight be shown on this religion, because that's why we became witnesses. Every person I've ever talked to who's left this organization, we often many times will throw out the question, if you had known what you know now, would you have become a witness? Would your mama become a witness? And I have met very few people who have left this organization and said, yeah, if I knew this was the same, I was still, most of them are like, no. And that's the point. We made decisions with partial information. And
for
today,
altruistic reasons.
That's exactly right. And in the year 2022, man, information is abounding everywhere. And so I tell people all the time, man, if you don't understand or if you're not familiar with Jehovah's Witness, it is by choice. It's by choice. The information, when my mom became a witness back in the 60s, man, you couldn't find nothing about Jehovah's Witness. Today, you have no excuse. And so if you want to be one of Jehovah's, fine. But just make sure you got both sides of the coin. Because I'm going to tell you, man, I say this all the time to my wife, man, I cannot imagine what it's going to be like for people who are Jehovah's Witnesses in 10, 15 years from today. All those witnesses who come on these sites and argue with us, this is the truth. Can you imagine what they are going to mentally go through in about 10 or 15 years? And them guys was right. We still walk around talking about the end coming. I cannot imagine what the emotional backlash is going to be knowing that you was just one click from getting out, and yet you stayed another 10, 15 years. I cannot imagine what that is going to do to people's mental health and state of mind. Boy, I just can't imagine. I mean, look at all of us who have left and realized, man, they duped us. They tricked us. Can you imagine being tricked and somebody was trying to tell you, man, they're running a trick on you. They're running a trick on you, and we didn't stop and look at it. I mean, man.
But it's even worse to think that, that trick's being run on us by people who themselves have had the trick run on them.
Yeah.
It turns good men bad. And look, I want to say, look, I I mentioned before I've been face to face with Penkava. I've talked to a lot of people that know him. I've been sent photos, experiences, stories. This man was a really good teacher. His students loved him. He was up for, I think he won a Disney Award back in 2000 for a Teacher of the Year. He appeared on Oprah. He was, his students loved him. Every summer he would take them out and make this whole archaeology mound and bring all the students outside, and they would dig like it was an Egyptian. The guy's very smart. I think he's genuine. He's got kids. He's got grandkids. He's not a bad guy. He really is not. Neither is the other guy. The other guy was born in. He was born around 1933-ish. He's a born-in witness from the 30s. Penkava was not. He came in much later. In fact, he came in after he got his teaching certificate, then 3 years later became a Jehovah's Witness. So he had already had this education before he became a witness. He was teaching. These are not bad men. These are good men that did a bad thing because they were duped. They thought watchtowers, they called that legal department. And let me tell you, I could see it in this man. I watched them plead for their lives. I watched both of these men. They gave statements. Even the guy on Zoom, even Colin Scott, they pleaded not to go to prison. They said, I got this many children. I've done this in my life. I've done that. And they were all telling the truth. It's all true. Okay? It's a good men. But what they did was very wrong because their critical thinking skills were not there. They knew that they lose their position as elders if they did anything other than rely upon. In fact, and interestingly enough, they invoked, during the trial, the lawyers, the Watchtower's legal department 100-plus year history. They even said, we won all of these Supreme Court civil cases, so we were relying upon the organization that had a profound impact on the legal system. That's what they are to this day, still relying upon all of those Hayden Covington cases from the 50s, 60s. With the, and they were right to argue the way that they did for those rights that affected other people in a positive way. But these men were relying. This is all different. This is not a scriptural.
No.
It's not even a constitutional issue, even though they're making it a constitutional issue. Yeah. Just pick up the phone, let the investigators handle it. You want to disfellowship this man, that's fine. Maybe that's a good thing for the congregation. Disfellowship this man. Let the professionals handle it when that child is 6 years old, and she will not be abused again by that man for 12 more years.
Yeah.
Do the right thing.
And that's really the whole thing. I try to be very, very clear when I talk about witnesses, because what the organization does, they teach people to run it both together. Your typical average Jehovah's Witness basically is a good person because they have absolutely nothing to do with policies, procedures, guidelines, directly SOP. They have nothing to do with that. Average Jehovah's Witness living in Mississippi, Alabama, they got nothing to do with what happens at Bethel. And so you have all of these basic people who are basically good people, but they've been given bad information. And as a result, they make decisions based on bad information. Look at all of us who left. Look at all the bad decisions we made. We didn't take jobs that were offered to us. We didn't take scholarship. These are bad decisions. And we made those bad decisions because we were given bad information. And when you have people who, you look at your typical elder, man, he don't know nothing about no early childhood development, behavioral science, he knows nothing about that. And so as a result, the Watchtower takes these men, put a little tag on them, make them feel good about themselves, and then push them out to take care of stuff they have no business even touching. I say it all the time. Yeah. If you look at the Royal Commission, and you look at those guys in that courtroom, in that hearing room, and they looked at those three elders that they brought out there, like I told you before, they were saying to themselves, I don't believe it. These are the 3 first responders that y'all send out on stuff like this? These 3 guys?
3 knuckleheads.
Can you imagine? Here we live here, you and I, we live here in the Baltimore, Washington area. There's a wreck on 95. Massive wreck, 3, 4, 5, 18 wheels, cars. And the first responders is the Boy Scouts because they learn how to do first aid. We would think any county that dispatched the first aid responders as the Boy Scouts is crazy. And that's what the Watchtower does. You have an issue as serious as this, and the first thing they dispatch is a guy who, at the end of the day, he paints windows, paints cars, and does Mickey Mouse stuff like that. It is, I mean, and this is never going to qualify him doing
Amen.
this to be someone who can handle a case like this. No, I'm sorry. Even myself, I look back now, man, when I was an elder, man, and they had me doing the blood. I was a secretary. And I remember the other elders were like, JT, you got to do the blood tonight, man. Your friends going to be asking you about that stuff. And you would look at those forms, man, and you would see words you didn't know what they meant. And the friends would come up to you and they say, well, Brother JT, which one should I take? And I said, well, sis, it's going to be up to you. Well, I ain't taking none of it just to be safe. Well, if that's what you want to do, that's okay, sis.
And how is that their decision?
Moving this around the world into countries where you have elders who have very little education, and they're holding up the same form to some sister saying, well, sis, which one of these blood products you going to take? And so this is the problem with this organization. They will put men in charge to take care of things that they simply are not qualified. And then the sad thing, man, is, Mark, at the end of the day, man, they'll snatch the rug out and leave you hanging by yourself. That's cold-blooded. That's cold-blooded.
So, Mark, so you're saying that that these men were not represented by Jehovah's Witness elders? I mean, legal
Correct.
counselors.
Yeah. They individually, they hired separate attorneys because they were separate cases. The cases weren't technically linked until the first day of trial. But what I will say is that we know that behind the scenes, Watchtower is supporting those elders could never afford this legal defense. And, one final thing I'll mention is that one reason we know this, among other reasons, is the fact that after the trial, the attorney for Penkava, Mr. Prosnitz, came out into the hallway, and there was that group of 12, those local white Jehovah's Witnesses who maybe some of them were family, but they were not Latino.
No, yeah, you mentioned that.
Which is where the crimes occurred. Okay. But they came out, and I'm not going to read this whole thing here, but
you can just some of this fun. Just give us.
Yeah. Well, so one of the things he said was, he said, I've been talking to Joel and John and DJ, and I told Mike, if John Miller wants to go into practice tomorrow, I'll snap at it. He's got the voice, he's got the look, he's got the manner, he's got the IQ, and he came in and testified. He's talking about John Miller, who came in and testified. So we know he's talking about the Watchtower legal department. And actually, what precipitated this comment was, I heard Penkava say, and he was very childlike in the way he says it. He's a smart guy, but he was very childlike in the way he said, he looked at his attorney, and the other Jehovah's Witnesses were there. Obviously, they'd never spoken to this attorney before. And here's this worldly man who drops F-bombs left and right. But here he is. He's coming out of the verdict, which was kind of a victory. Even though they lost the case, the verdict was kind of a victory because his client did not go to jail, and the state wanted 12 days of jail. But he asked them, I heard him say to the attorney, his attorney, in front of these other witnesses, he said, tell him what you told me about the Watchtower legal department. Okay, because obviously Prosnitz has had a lot of back and forth with the Watchtower legal department, and Prosnitz had told Penkava how much he liked John Miller and that legal team. And this is where he says, yeah, he's got the manner, he's got the IQ, he came and testified. He said, I begged him. I was on my boat. I said, listen, John, you are forbidden to say no. You must come in. I need you. Don't mess with me. I'll subpoena you, jokingly. And he came in. And when he said that, there was laughter from the Jehovah's Witness gallery. Then he goes on to say, they've been great, and Joel's been great. Obviously, it's a reference to Joel Taylor, who is, he works these child abuse cases, mostly civil, all the time. And I've seen him in court in Montana. And anyway, he talks about how great the whole crew was. And then he says there's a substantial likelihood that we'll have an appeal. And he talks about the reliance on defense, and he goes on to talk about how there's basically a 50-50 chance that an appellate court or even the Supreme Court would rule as to whether or not the mother's testimony would be included in clergy confidentiality or not. But then, there's more of this conversation that went on outside of the courtroom. And at this point, towards the end of the conversation, I think it was Penkava who said, basically want to, thank you, for what you did. And that whole group just clapped as if they were clapping for another JW brother. I mean, it was a big round of applause by these witnesses who had not been party to this case or had not been in court, as far as I know, any other time. And they just love that this attorney, who has nothing to do with witnesses aside from this case, supported them. And I don't think they understand. It was just such a childlike statement that, what it's like, JT and Lady C, to when you were a witness and you bragged about Bethel. Maybe you said, man, the Bethel is so clean. We run a factory. It's like you could eat breakfast off of the floor. Or
That's
maybe
true.
you bragged about the legal department, or maybe, because we won all these victories
Yep.
in the U.S. Supreme Court, over 50 victories. I mean, we all did that. We all thought it was a noble cause, that we fought for religious freedom, not just ours, but for everyone's. And Phil Brumley goes around giving speeches on that, about how the witnesses have fought for the religious freedom for all people, and that's part of their noble
It's
cause.
amazing. It's amazing. It's amazing.
But this man, he's just misguided. He's not a bad guy. What he did was very wrong. He made a terrible, terrible decision that ruined this girl's life. But he did it with this veil, this template. And I know, like I said, I know there's a lot of people out there that want to hang this man. I want to say this, okay? It's not about this man. And you guys brought it up. JT, is not about this man. It's not about Colin Scott. This is about the big picture.
It is. It really is.
There's more cases in Illinois. They know about them, okay? Stuff's going to happen. Maybe there's an appeal, but other stuff's going to happen. This is not the end of it. These guys didn't go after these elders so passionately for a year and a half, not even counting the criminal trial, but they didn't go after these elders to go after two elderly men and put them in prison. That's not what this is all about, okay? It's about more issues, including the fact that you can't just disregard state law. And remember, one thing the prosecutor said early on is, you can't just sit in your basement, create a religion, and then abuse children and then not report it.
Yeah.
It's bigger than this.
It's that's why I tell people, as elders, as an elder, you're the lowest on the totem in the corporate food chain. And so, because of the witness culture, and I think for so many of us, we just simply accepted whatever we were told. And if you didn't accept whatever you were told, you knew to keep your mouth shut. So you went along to get along. And for a lot of elders, I mean, that's one of the reasons why a lot of elders and people leave, is because they just reached the point, like, I can't do this no more. And then you have others who are like, well, maybe they'll change. Because I remember being told directly, JT, just hang in there, man. The governing body, we're going to get some fresh blood, fresh brothers, younger brothers in the governing body, new ideas, fresh viewpoints. And I'm like, I'm not staying around to see what happens when the next crew come in. And man, the next crew came in, and boy, them guys wilder than the first crew that I knew when I was at Bethel. So you reach a point where you're like, I can't take this no more. And that is part of that cultural thing. And so you literally watch people literally go along to get along, even when they deep down inside know. Because I've talked to people afterwards, after they leave, like, I saw it a few years back. I didn't want to say anything. And so at some point, each person, like Raymond Franz said, you run into that crisis of conscience. And once you hit that crisis of conscience, man, you don't have but two choices. And of course, the problem is that each individual reaches that point at different places. You gave the example about the elder who ended up testifying, whereas just 6, 7, 8 months before, he was a dyed-in-the-wool branch man, society man, whatever the slave said. No, that was him. And then 6 months later, he's like, I got to get out of here. And the next thing you know, he's on the stand testifying. Not only did he leave, he came back and testified. So people have to understand that everybody moves at a different rate. And that's the most frustrating thing. I know it, because we talk to enough people. Man, my daddy, he just don't see it.
You know what I think? I wonder if the brothers that were on trial are going to wake up.
Yeah.
Do you think they're going to wake up?
I don't think so.
No?
That's
Okay.
not, yeah.
They've been
Look,
tested.
I mean, maybe after watching the Critical Thinker channel, they might, but
Oh my God.
but look, these are good. Look, I mean, when I use the expression a lot. You know, what is that expression anyway? Once you get past the point of no return, you know, it's like, you know, my mother's 81 now, and I don't even want her to leave
No,
JWs,
yeah,
you
some
know.
people need to stay. I think for some people, they
You
wouldn't
have
make it if they
to.
left.
You have
Let
to,
them
you
stay.
know.
Let them just.
That one man's 89 years old now. I mean, look,
They
come
wouldn't- they
on. I
wouldn't
mean,
do
just let him have his faith. And
Yeah.
look, we're not, you know, this is a big picture here. We're looking long term down the road. You know, it took me 46 years to get out, and
Yeah, same with. I mean, it took us years to get out, decades to get out. You know.
yeah. So
I think that's
we got to manage our expectations. Is way I look at it.
that's true. And I think that generally speaking, for us, and this is really what our channel is really all about, is we want, because if you start doing it, you're gonna come to a certain conclusion, and it's not gonna be hard. Once you start asking those critical thinking questions, man, you either have to start. You're gonna have to start lying to yourself, because you're gonna know
Yeah.
what the answer is, and it's like, and that's why a lot of people, Lady C will tell you, she's talked to so many people, and they'll say, Lady C, I don't want to go down there, because deep down inside, they know what's down there. They know that if they
Yeah.
go down there and take a look, it's not going to be pretty. They're going to realize that what they have been a part of doesn't hold water, which is really the ultimate contradiction, because we knock on so many. They spend like 2 billion hours knocking on people's doors, basically asking a simple question. Sir, are you willing to take a look at your religion, even though you might find things are not what you want? That's really what every witness does when they go to the door. And yet not one Jehovah's Witness could do the same thing. That's crazy.
They can't ask the same question
Yeah,
of themselves.
that's
yeah.
crazy.
It gets a little bit difficult for them.
That's
I
crazy.
mean, because we got an email from someone a couple of weeks ago that their father or something was on their deathbed, and
tough.
the father did not want to speak to their son, because he felt like that would be a test of his loyalty to Jehovah, so that he was terminal. If he died and he spoke to the son or daughter, then that may be a situation where he might not be resurrected now.
That's right.
So people are kind of afraid.
It's a shame.
In that kind
I mean,
of
he's
situation.
sad.
I mean, that father, when we read it, I was thinking, we were discussing, and from the father's perspective, this is Satan giving me my last test. I'm gonna be faithful to Jehovah,
Yeah.
you know. And his son's trying to help him out.
Right.
With, Daddy, you know, we need to take you to the hospital. You know, I ain't talking to you, boy. I ain't talking to you. And so this is just how ridiculous this thing becomes. And it's only Mark, when you step back and look at it, and you're like, this is crazy. This
Right.
this is some crazy
So-
stuff.
How did this happen?
Oh man, I tell you,
it was so hard. Like, you guys brought me back on screen, so I'm trying to look over here to see what
Okay.
everybody's saying. So it's like,
Yeah, you're right.
there's a lot coming down the stream and
Yeah,
everything. So I
people
hope
see it. Yeah.
that I was able to put as many comments on the screen as I could. I don't know if you guys
Yeah, we
got a
can see.
chance to
Yeah,
see
yeah.
Well, I'll
those.
tell you what.
Yeah.
If you guys get a question that didn't get answered, I'm just saying this to everyone, and with your permission, you forward those questions on to me. Send your questions to JT and Lady C. Somebody wants to add, and you can forward them to me. I'll do my best.
Yeah.
Right.
And
We'll
know,
try-
I do
we'll
have
try
a
to, yeah.
website coming up soon that
great.
because I've been working on. I want all documents to be transparent and free of charge to the public, without any having to go it's tough because it's very expensive to go. One of the transcripts from this case cost me like $250. I don't want people to have to pay that. I want people to go on, and like you were talking about earlier, that, to be able to read these transcripts, whether it's a Jeffrey Jackson or whether it's Bradley Kelm or any of this case, as much as we can provide to the public, it needs to be open, free of charge, because no witness is ever going to read it if they think it's monetized. We want it to be available to the public as a public service, the same way the Bible is free. If you're a believer in the Bible, you don't charge for that. Okay, it's free and open, and whereas the Elders Manual, that's not free and open to the public. But if the Bible is free and the public library is free, these documents should be made available. If we have them, we should share them. So they're going to be on different websites. They're going to be on the one that I'm getting ready to release. I just want to get some more docs on before we go live with it and get a couple articles. But I want people to have that. and it won't be a lot of commentary on there that sounds apostate, because we want facts only, because the witnesses who are waking up and watching the critical thinkers, they're looking for people that are not ranting and raving and just saying all this stuff about witnesses that it's not true. We want to get to the precise facts. We want to help people that
facts
are
out there.
sincere.
Let people read it for themselves, and
Yes.
then they have to.
Yes.
I'm a very big proponent of your views as well. Let people get the information. Let people get it. Let people
Can't
get
force it down their throats.
Maybe
have to-
not.
Yeah, I think that when people feel like they've stumbled on something
Yeah.
themselves, as
Yeah.
opposed to somebody
There it
telling
is.
them,
Yeah.
There it is.
they will read and they'll go back and they'll sneak. We even got
Oh, yeah.
someone
Oh, yeah.
emailed us and they said that, could you please do your videos and make them a little bit shorter? Because they said because they feel guilty about, like indulging in the content. So they said, well, if you just make it 5 minutes, I won't feel so bad, and I can I can go ahead on and watch
I thought
it.
that was that was very
It's-
profound.
It's
Right.
good.
they have this inner struggle. If I listen too long, I'm going over. But if a little bit, I can take a little bit.
But once
and
that
so-
ice is broken, though,
once it's broken, man.
put those 5-minute videos out there. But then you got the 10, the 15, and the 2-hour.
Yeah.
Well,
Once that
then-
ice is broken, the floodgates open.
Well, then someone also stated that they like the long videos because when they're cutting the grass and doing housework,
They're listening.
then they want to listen. And
Do
if
them
it's
both.
only 10 minutes, then they gotta, keep
Go to
going
the
back
next-
to re-up on something,
That's
But
all
then,
right.
we're also on some of the largest podcast outlets as well. So we're able to people can listen to us on audio so that they
Is that
they can
linked?
just put us in
Is
the
that linked
playlist
in your?
Yeah, put it in the yeah.
Yeah, because I'd like to do that myself. Are you linked to that in your description?
Yeah, well, I'm going to be adding it because
add it. We
I
wanna
just
add it in,
updated our
Yeah.
podcast to Buzzsprout, and so we went in. I went in and like registered for all of them. Like
Yeah,
So,
they'll take you out. They'll
Apple
route your
is the
information.
top one. Then like Stitcher, Audible. We're even on Amazon Music now.
Yeah,
So you can just go there, put it in the playlist, and just listen.
yeah.
And we
so-
we
I
need
mean,
to get this into the hands
I'm
of
telling you, man, the internet
people.
is a game changer for the organization in terms of no longer being able to control the flow of information.
Yeah.
You can hide, it's like water. I mean, it's like water. Water
Right.
is serious. I don't care how you pour water, it will
Yeah.
find a way to work its way down. It's going to find a
Exactly.
crack, a hole, a split. You can't stop water from working its way down. If
Right.
it's not
and
sealed,
it's a solvent.
Exactly. And Mark, I just have a question for you. So,
Yeah.
like the information that you were sharing, do you want me to link to that? I can link to that on your Twitter feed as well, right?
When you say the information,
Those transcripts that you were reading. I know you're getting a website soon,
Mhm.
and we can easily, link to that. But
sure,
the stuff
absolutely.
that you shared today, do you have any of that? Anything electronically that we can share?
Yeah, we'll talk about that offline, and I'll send you
Okay.
whatever
Okay,
I
good.
have
Yeah.
now. And there's also,
Yeah.
yes,
Yeah.
there- and
yeah.
Really all the-
and we, yeah, and
Okay.
Okay. So all the people. Oh, I muted you, Jay. I'm sorry.
Come on, tell us, JT,
you
he's
saying?
late over here at night, man. Late over here at night. So for those who we get the 24-hour clock around the world. Thank you for
Right.
staying up and being in our audience. I mean, this has really been an interesting journey for us, man. It really has.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really.
So
has.
anyway, so we appreciate
Yeah.
everyone. We appreciate you, Mark, for
Yeah,
coming
Mark.
on.
tell the
sharing
wife
this
and everybody ask about her.
information.
Yeah.
And
we
I
got to
saw
talk about
Kim.
these things.
Yeah, I saw Kim O'Donnell online. So thanks a
Yeah, I
lot
thought
for
I saw
all
it.
your
Yeah, I thought I saw it.
comments.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Okay.
Right.
Well, at this
She's
point, I
right
guess we can
behind
just
me.
go ahead and wrap up, man.
She's-
Is
that's
there
right.
any
She's right
final
behind
thoughts? Is any final thoughts you want to say, Mark, before we wrap up?
Well, look, I think we mentioned it before, but it's a victory. These elders are convicted, and we don't know if there's going to be an appeal. We think there's going to be an appeal, but look, I can't thank the state of Illinois enough for pursuing this, because we have seen, I'll give you an example, Arkansas. I went to that trial where Roderick Watkins had molested children from state to state, including Indiana, Arkansas. And he got 80 years in prison. And the real question is, what will state, and I don't know all the exception laws for mandatory reporting in Arkansas, but the bottom line is that man was found guilty despite the fact that the elders didn't cooperate. In fact, at one point, when the detective in the Arkansas case called Watchtower, New York, they got an attorney named Gerard DeJotte, who is one of their attorneys as part of this child abuse and other cases. And he said, you want a subpoena? No, he said, you want documents? You give me a subpoena. He said it just like that to the detective, not cooperating with the investigation. They won't turn over documents. That's why they're losing battle after battle after battle. Right now, we got two big cases in Montana. The Kakert and it's Hardin, Montana. It's the Kakert and Rowland cases. And we did report on that a couple of years ago when it got started. But this case is going to go on for a long time. Watchtower, Pennsylvania, and New York are both defendants. They've already been fined and sanctioned for not turning over documents, the same way they were in the Montana Nunez case. Judges, they like to threaten, when this kind of misbehavior goes on, they threaten default judgments, meaning that Watchtower will instantly lose the case, like they did in JW versus Watchtower in California. They've got their back against the wall, and they're spending millions hiring law firms all across from New York, from coast to coast. And they are in a lot of trouble for violating court orders to turn over documents, and they think they have the constitutional right. They barely even invoke the Bible. It's always their First Amendment. So they're in a lot of trouble financially, look, they have billions, but I mean that they're spending millions of dollars in donated funds. If the witnesses knew that these funds were being donated that way, I think they would think twice about this. And that's why we need to get the accurate word out, the non-sensational part, get the facts out, get the documents out. I'll do everything I can, no matter what it costs, to get these out to the public and share them with the public. And that's what we're doing. The facts have to be available because the witnesses are not going to believe that this is going on. I guarantee you that those 12 people that showed up, they don't know. Not even that attorney knew what was really going on with the Jehovah's Witnesses and child abuse. He was there defending one client, and the other attorney defended a second client, and they did a good job. They did as best the job as they could have possibly done. But all that money ultimately comes out of the pockets of witnesses. They paid for that through their donations to Watchtower, who then they set up an escrow account, and this is how it's usually done. They set up an escrow account, and then attorneys are paid out of that escrow account. This is a big, big problem, and is being paid for on the backs of hardworking JW electricians and window washers and housekeepers and all of that. It's got to stop. We've got other cases coming up. I've got a trial, 10 minutes. I could walk to it from here, 10 minutes from my house. It's not a child abuse case. It's a ministerial servant who surveilled women taking upskirt photos. He took hidden images of his own fiance. It's a ministerial servant, arrested on 24 counts of PP Tom and multiple other charges. That's a trial right here, 10 minutes from my house, coming up in May. There's a lot going on, and I'm going to be continuing to report on it as long as I'm breathing, because these aren't apostate lies. There's a lot of junk reporting out there. Let's stick to the facts. Let's provide what, is on paper. And let the public decide, let witnesses decide, just get it into their hands and let them make the decision. If they want to stay with the organization after, their children are put at risk by what these elders are being told to do or not do, then look, that's their decision. But we're not going to continue to sit back and let children get abused without it being reported. So like I predicted earlier, they're going to make some changes to those elders manuals. I guarantee it.
I'm sure they will.
Always
they've
for
been
their
revising,
protection.
man, so much. they've been revising them so much lately. I mean, they're updating it. Like, here's some new things put in. I mean, because it is required, because they're literally, they're making up stuff based on whatever happens after this case, after that case, after that case, and for people who are elders, man, it's just bad.
When you talk about the updating of these elders manuals, do you feel like JT, when you were an elder, do you feel like they made that many changes to the elders manuals back when we were in?
No. In fact, it's interesting if you look at what part of the elders manual they're changing. They're changing all of the stuff that have nothing to do with the Bible. It's amazing. It's really amazing. If you look at the flock, we call the flock book, the sections that deal with the actual Bible, it's just been the same forever. But all of this made up stuff, the policies, and of course, all these policies, they try to loop it into, well, this is what the Bible says, but they're making it up. And that's why they literally have to change it all the time, because they have elders involved in things they have no qualifications or business being involved in. And that is the basic problem.
Well, I think what I really feel about this whole thing is that what the information that Mark is reporting on just has to show Jehovah's Witnesses that they can no longer continue to think that because they're Jehovah's Witnesses that this doesn't happen in the organization, because they're people and they do things just like other people. They're no different than any other group of people. And I think that the internet is really bringing all this stuff to light, because people can, they can sit behind their computer and click a mouse button and tell people what's going on. And they don't really have to feel as intimidated as they used to. And they're able to see there's other people coming forward. And I think that's the most important part of this whole equation, is they realize that they're not by themselves, The
internet is the biggest secret sin. I mean, look, you have some people that maybe they drink too much, but they do it in private. And that's, Watchtower might call that a secret sin. And they say, well, you should stop drinking for like 30 days to prove that you're not, but I'm saying, it's and all the other sexual things that people do, they're doing them. I mean, we've known this, I was kind of naive myself when I was young, thinking that all these families were just perfect. That they were the young people I used to associate. Then when I, years later, I find out that this person was sleeping with that person and this person was drinking and all this stuff happened. I was really naive to all of that. And but see, again, they held that in secret. But I think the biggest secret is that people are going on the internet now, and and it's not all for pornography. It's the worst sin, which is apostate material. Yeah. But that's why what you guys are doing is so important, because you're doing it in a methodical, critical thinking capacity, and you're not, you're not putting out the false stories out there. You're doing it right. Yeah. That's making a difference.
Yeah, because we tell people all the time, you literally don't have to make up anything about the organization. Their own published material is actually the worst evidence that you can show. I mean, we was talking about last, the other, once before about, the clergy issue. They will hide behind technicalities, and like, I think you say word salad.
I tell you what I like is what the prosecution said is that the Jehovah's Witnesses throw everything together into a confessional soup. Patrick Keneally said that for the state of Illinois, confessional soup, he called it. That's and funny. The state said, no. Yeah. No, it's not all confessional soup. You got a confessor and you got the elders that you confess to. That's your confession right there.
That's interesting.
Don't throw it all in that soup.
Right.
Great point.
Well, we're coming up on, we're just past 5:00. So I want to make sure that we end this at so people can get back on to doing what they're doing for the day.
Yeah. Thank you so much, man, for coming.
Time zones as
well. My pleasure.
But so thank you all so much for being in our audience.
Absolutely.
We really appreciate it.
Yeah.
And we'll be doing more of these live streams.
Maybe not so long, but we wanted to make sure that we covered brought people up to speed who didn't know what it was about and how a lot of the things went down, and just give a perspective, like you said, just providing the facts. This is what happened, and this is what we got to deal with now. And so we'll go from here. Well,
thank you guys for doing that and having me on your
Absolutely.
program. Been
Thank
wanting
you
to talk
so
to you
much.
guys for a long time.
I know
Yeah,
we've been
all
trying
right,
to
then.
get together for like about a year now.
Yeah, no,
Life gets in the way.
Like
Yes.
2
Oh my
years.
God.
Yeah.
All
my
right.
I don't
pleasure.
know. Me and
I'm-
Mark lives basically up the road from us. So
Right.
we'll
Exactly.
get together, man. We'll get
Yeah,
together.
I'm
we'll
gonna end
be
this
doing this.
broadcast then. So see everybody
Alrighty.
later.
Thank you
all right.
guys.
So
Take
now-
care. All right.